Hello again. It's Monsterforge. And if you guys will remember, last time we talked about making stuff, we talked about making this beautiful chap here. We went through all the steps of sculpting him from the blank plug, which was uh, aluminum foil covered with Sculpey, regular Sculpey, and then sculpted on top of with Super Sculpey. And we finished him up in the last video, which was the Sculpting a Critter series. Now, we're going to start with the Painting a Critter series. And this is just the starter. We're going to do the base coat, primer, and just talk about a couple of different things. This will probably be a really short video. This series will be probably in shorter chunks because you can get less done with paint in each step until you get to the dry brushing. And when you get to the dry brushing, you can kind of put a little bit on. It'll dry in just a second, and you can put a little bit more on. But I just wanted to start off with some tips and tricks about what to use. And at this stage in the game, let's get into the materials. This is cheap crap. Don't let that stop you from using it. Yes, there are better paints. There are higher quality paints. But I just find that this stuff works just fine for me. For one, these figures don't have moving parts. If you have figures with moving parts, this stuff is not going to work because it will peel right off any friction you get on it. You need something that has a little bit better quality for hold. But since these figurines are mainly just one piece, static figures, this stuff is fine because after we use it and after we get all the painting done, we will seal it with a sealer like this. This is DecoArt Americana Durrrrr Gloss Varnish. I get this at what's the name of the place? Michael's. I get this at Michael's, and it's it used to be more expensive than it is. This stuff used to be, I think it was like, no, I'm thinking about another kind. There's another type of sealer that you can use. It's called Delta Ceramcoat, and I find that this stuff is just about the same. What matters is that this stuff will give your paint a better finish, a better look, if you're going for glossy. They do have a dull coat as well, but it'll give it a better finish, and it will protect the paint. So if anything happens, if something scuffs into it or whatever, the outer coating of it will be protected. Now, this is the gloss varnish. Now, another thing that I like to use, if the character I'm doing needs to be more of a matte finish, one thing that I use a lot of times is Mod Podge. And the thing about buying a thing of Mod Podge, it goes on real thin. And I've had this bottle of Mod Podge for years and years and years. And this is the matte finish. This is stuff used for decoupage, like you have a piece of furniture or whatever, and you want to put an image on it, or anything that you want to stick stuff to. This is like a glue and a finish, and this stuff is tough because it's used on things like furniture and all, so it has to deal with a lot of damage on a daily basis. This stuff is really good, and they make a gloss version of this, so that's a good option too. This stuff, you can find it anywhere. Most Walmart stores will carry this, and it's dirt cheap. I mean, a bottle like this, I'm thinking that's somewhere like probably like $8 or something like that. I haven't looked in a while. Probably like $8, and it lasts forever. So I would say a good bet if you want to do like figurines like this. Now, once you get more into, doing figures that have articulation where the joints rub up against each other. You want something that's a little bit more durable, paint-wise. I'll get that in a second. But anyway, the finishes, and I'll cover this again whenever I get to the finishing part. Mod Podge is really good. Whenever I have like a shiny figure or a figure that has like the colors or the thing, I tend to use the shinier the gloss varnishes. And whenever I have a figure like this guy, I wanted the colors to really pop, and slathering on that shiny coat really brings them out. This guy's in the store right now. Ooh. But yeah, I paint it and I give it, a nice coat, usually a couple of coats of the varnish, and I'll really protect that paint. I mean, I can hit it and there's no marks left in it. I mean, if I hit it with a hammer, of course it's going to tear up the paint, but since it's a Sculpey, it's going to tear up the Sculpey too. Don't take hammers to your figurines, kids. But anyway, this stuff works just fine. You apply it with a brush. I like to use a softer I like to use a softer bristled brush because it goes on a lot easier and clearer, and you don't risk rubbing any of the paint off. If you have a rougher brush, you can do that. Okay. So, talking about the paint, this is Apple Barrel. It's put out, I wonder if it's put out by Plaid. Almost every craft store you go to. I know, let's see, where is it? Craft Smart. Is this the one that's distributed by Michaels? Yes, this is distributed by Michaels. It's about the same thing. It's just craft paint. And that's fine for doing these figurines. And I'm kind of trying to show you guys how to do stuff on the cheaps. You can buy paint just as expensive as you want. You can buy brushes that are just as expensive. The brushes that I use are cheap too. I'm a cheapskate. It's just the way I am. It's how I had to learn growing up, not being, wealthy. I had to learn to use what I had. The brushes I get are just, I don't even know if it has a name on it anymore. It's just, there's packs of brushes at Walmart. You'll have like several brushes. And I'll use this type of brush to put on the bigger layers of paint, and of course you have, bigger and smaller paint brushes, and you can get different ones, and you can get very nice paint brushes. You can get paint brushes that are, downright expensive, and I've used those in the past, but not. I put paintbrushes through a lot of stress, and so this paintbrush has seen it. But this paintbrush is a fantastic brush for dry painting, dry brushing, because it's wide, it's bristled out. You can pick up a little bit of paint on it and use it. And we'll get to dry brushing eventually. Dry brushing is when you use very little paint on the brush, and you use it to just lightly put paint over a surface. Once again, like this guy here, he's got a lot of dry brushing on him. He's sculpted with a lot of detail in the musculature and such, and then I base coat him with black, and then I bring out the paint, the sculpted details with a dry brush. So it's kind of what we do. Anyway, today we're going to do some base coating and priming. And basically priming is you're priming the surface for paint later on. And I like to start with my primer, or your primer can be, it's better to be gray or black or white. It's according to what you're going for. If you're going to paint a figure that's a little bit darker, it's nice to start with a black. And there's a technique that I like to do. I know that your eye plays tricks on you with things that you see. And black tends to makes your brain think that the thing is farther away. So if you paint it black and then you add layers of color on top of that are lighter, it makes that lighter color push forward towards your eyes more in your brain. And so, you kind of fool yourself a little bit. But it's a nice way to bring out details in the sculpt, to accentuate parts of things. The more you work with it, the more you learn how to use it that way. Excuse me. The psychological effects of color. But anyway, if you want a character to be colors like yellow or red, or anything close to those, yellow and red are translucent. Most of the time, the paint you're going to find is going to be translucent. That's red or yellow. And it's nice to start with a white coat under that. Or gray, like a light gray, it'll work just fine. But white tends to work better. That's what I've always found. You might see some dark spots on the table here. This is the batch of little guys that I'm working on right now. Some sculpts that are coming up. Let's see. Let's try to see if you'll focus. Yeah. These are some sculpts that I'm painting up for this coming Monday's drop in my store. And so while I'm working on that, I figured I'd go ahead and start working on this guy too. And I don't know if I'll have him ready for the store Monday or whether he's going to have to wait for the next Monday. We'll just have to see how far I get. But anyway, what I tend to do is I tend to find a way that I can hold the figure and I can turn it and work on it. And a lot of times what I do is I'll hold the top of the figure and paint the bottom, or I'll hold the bottom of the figure and paint the top. And sometimes I can get it in such a way that I can, work with it this way and just keep turning it as I paint it. But it's just easier, I think, to hold it by the bottom, paint the top, and then set it down to dry. You don't paint the bottom part. After it's dried fully, you can pick it up by the dried paint and then paint the unpainted part at the bottom and let that dry. There's a lot of steps in painting. There's a lot of paint and dry type things. And sometimes whenever, I try not to do this when I'm doing the base because it tends to dry in such a way, it dries almost like a skin of paint and it leaves wet paint underneath, is to use a hairdryer. The only time I'll really use a hairdryer is when it's getting closer to finished and the paint layers are thinner and thinner. And that way you can just hit it with a hairdryer and blammo, you can go right back into painting again. So anyway, sorry. A sleepy boy. Hardly got any sleep. Anyway, what I tend to do is I use caps from drink bottles, or this happens to be a medicine bottle cap, and I use these all the time for my paints. And you can see there's just coated, and some of these things I've used so much paint over the years that I've used it that it's built up all the way to the top. Like that's solid. That doesn't go down anymore. But I'll still use it. I'll still put paint on top of that. But I tend to keep my white ones free of other colors because it's easier to, like this. Like this is the all white one, and I have an all black one that I tend to use. It's a little bit of white got in there. And you see my desk is just absolutely loaded with color because what I tend to do is whenever I'm dry brushing, I'll get a little bit of paint on the brush and, just kind of work it down until it's into the bristles and there's not much on there. And so you get the dry brush effect. But we'll go into that later on in painting this figure. But anyway, let's just get started. I've got my paint in my little cap, and I'm gonna load some paint on the brush. And here's the first stroke, and it's always the most important. It doesn't matter. You're gonna coat the whole thing in paint anyway, so I'm just being silly. But yeah, you just try to cover all the surfaces that you can. Get the paint in all the nooks and crannies, just on this layer, really, for what I do. I tend to dry brush all of the paint details as I go. So I'm just trying to get paint into all the little nooks and crannies. And sometimes if you have a figure that the nooks and crannies are really deep in it, use a smaller brush. This guy, his details aren't all that deep. So I'm just kind of working the paint in, kind of spreading it out, and that'll help it dry faster. If you glob it on, it takes longer to dry. But you see, it's getting there. And you just keep turning it and looking at different angles, because sometimes an unpainted place will hide from you. And you won't notice it till you get to the point where it's like, oh, you're dry brushing and here's a spot that's the original color. And, you know, it might be a spot that's inconvenient for you to be able to paint it with the color you're working on. It would have been better if it was painted at the base coat level. So sometimes I give it a couple of base coats. And this is not thin down paint. This is just the paint straight out of the bottle. And it's not always good to do that. Particularly if you're working with action figures, it's better to go thin coats. But these figurines, it doesn't really matter because, like I said, there's no moving parts. It's not a case like that where you're trying to get your paint as thin as you can so that it will kind of slide underneath the different parts of a joint. Maybe one of these days I'll do a tutorial about painting an action figure. But trying to get him as close down, and I like to have it where my thumb and my pointer finger only have this one little spot to cover, and so I can get more paint done in one go, which decreases the time I have to wait for things to dry. The paint is thin enough on him right now. I've spread it out enough that I could hit it with a hairdryer right now, but I'm not going to do that. And you'll see it also, I don't know if you can see it or not, but this finger right here that I'm moving, I'm holding it with that too to kind of steady it. You can turn him around and hit him right here with some paint. And you can also just push the paint in with the tips of it. And like I said, I'm rough on a paintbrush, and that's why I go with the cheap ones. I've seen some people paint with such finesse. It's like, you know, they really bring a lot to their paint stroke game, and it's just like, that's not how I work. Just me personally. It's different strokes for different folks. But I think that's good for now. I'll let it dry, because sometimes what can happen is when you've got paint into the crack of something, it looks like it's covered the thing, and then when it dries, the paint tends to pull closer to the surface, and when it does, it can split a little bit, and you have a little gap there where something's not colored. And so what I like to do is I like to let it dry and then examine it again and see if I need to put more of the primer or the base coat. And that goes for extra coats too, whenever you get to different layers. And it's like, I know it's really hard to see the details right now in the black, but trust me, you really can see them in person. And the thing is, we'll bring out the details later on as we paint more. But that is, I guess that's that for our first look at painting one of these little minis. And I hope you come back for more. So this has been episode 1 of, I can't remember if I called them how to paint or how to sculpt a critter, or if it was sculpting a critter. I think it was sculpting a critter. We'll just say this is going to be painting a critter, part 1. And I'll see you later on when this dries. Goodbye.